Welcome back, folks. It's time for our next 6.5 Grendel video. Now today we're going to continue shooting the 120 grain Hornady ELD Match. Hopefully you guys aren't sick of this. We've shot this same bullet in the previous two videos and we're going to shoot it again today. This might be the last one for a while because we're narrowing in on a good load. And that's the point of sticking with this bullet, is I don't really have a good go-to load for my 18-inch Faxon barrel, and this 120 grain ELD Match is by far the best shooting bullet we've tried so far. So really want to work up a good load that I can just have as my go-to for this barrel. In the last video we shot PowerPro Varmint and got some pretty decent velocities. We made it up to 2372 using 29.0 grains of PowerPro Varmint. I'm hoping we can keep pushing it a little bit and maybe get up to around the 2450 feet per second mark. Now our accuracy in the last video was good, so hopefully the accuracy holds together. We had excellent standard deviations, so hopefully that continues. We're just going to continue, we're going to pick up where we left off with Varmint. Our max charge in the last video was 29.0 grains. We didn't see any pressure signs, we didn't see any problems. If we look at the Sierra load data for their 120 grain Sierra Match King, they show a max of 29.3, so we were a little bit below that. So what I want to do today is reshoot our max load from the last video, 29.0 grains, and then I want to keep working up in 0.2 of a grain increments, which takes us up to 29.8. We might be pushing it, I don't know. We might not make it up to 29.8, but we'll keep a close eye on the brass, watch our velocities and accuracy, and just see how it goes. Now, about a year ago, I shot this same powder in a video with the 123 grain Sierra Match King, and in that video we had gone up to 29.2 grains with this powder with a 3 grain heavier bullet and didn't have major pressure problems. So I'm hoping, we'll be able to make it up to 29.8 today and get that velocity up there just a little bit. The other powder I want to shoot today is IMR 8208 XBR. I've been kind of going back and forth. It was either going to be 8208 XBR or AR comp. I've had luck with both of those powders in the Grendel in the past, but both of these powders, AR comp and 8208 XBR, I've also gotten myself into trouble and hit really bad pressure signs in the past. So picking load data for 8208 XBR is something I want to be careful with. If we go to the Sierra app, for their 120 grain Sierra Match King, they show a max charge of 27.3 grains. But if we look at the data for the 123 grain Sierra Match King, it's 28.0. So heavier bullet, and they show a max that's 0.7 of a grain higher. If we go over to the Hodgdon website, for the 123 grain Sierra Match King, they show 28.5 grains max charge. So it's a pretty big window here as far as max charge goes. I mean, if you look at the Hornady manual, it's like 26 point something. Well, in that video I was talking about that I did about a year ago with the 123 grain Sierra Match King, I shot both of these powders. We already talked about Varmint, IMR 8208 XBR. In that video, we went to 27.5 grains, but we hit pressure signs with our last couple charges. So there's no way we could make it up to the 28.5 grain max that Hodgdon has on their site. That's just too hot. So for today's bullet, the 120 grain ELD Match, let's shoot 27.5. That should be pretty close. It gave me pressure problems with the 123 grain Sierra Match King, but I'm hoping a little bit lighter bullet. And also we're shooting Lapua brass, which has a little bit more case capacity than the Hornady brass I was shooting in that video. So I'm hoping 27.5 will be okay. For this one, we're going to shoot 0.3 of a grain increments, which puts us starting at 26.3. Hopefully all that made sense. I was a little bit all over the place, talking about different videos and different bullet weights, but hopefully you followed along. The primer is the one we've been shooting lately, the CCI 450, and our brass is going to be the Lapua that we introduced in the last video. It has now been fired twice, so this will be the third firing. Overall length, we're going to stick with just what we've been shooting, which is 2.260 inches. That puts us about 10 thousandths off the lands in my barrel. And with my Hornady bullet comparator, it ends up being about a 1.728 inch cartridge-based ogive measurement. So that's how we'll be setting our overall length, is with that 1.728 CBTO. Does that cover it? I think that covers it. Not too much to talk about here. This is the same video that we, as the last two. So let's get started with loading. Now, I have not resized my brass yet, so we still need to do that. And I think what I'm going to do is use the Hornady one-shot lube. I normally use lanolin and alcohol blend, or sometimes I'll use Redding Imperial sizing dye wax. Those are kind of my favorite sizing lubes, but this Hornady kit that I recently got came with the Hornady one-shot lube. I want to give it a try. So reading the can, I guess you just spray it on here while they're sitting in a loading block. I would imagine after a while your loading block gets greasy and gross. I don't know. Now I really don't want to spray it all over my bench mat here. So let me grab a paper towel or something. All right, there we go. And we shake this stuff up. It's got a rattler in there. And I'm supposed to spray at a 45-degree angle so that we get some down into the necks of the cases and cover the body. So let's just go to it here. Man, that seems like a lot. But I guess we got to flip it around and hit the other side. Is that enough? I don't know. We'll find out. So now we're supposed to let it dry. The can says that it's supposed to dry within 1 minute, but I've heard from some other people that sometimes it takes a little bit longer, and I guess it's important to let it dry completely. So we'll give that a couple minutes. Now the bottle says, I'll tell you what, I'll read it to you. Yeah, One Shot with Dynaglide is a non-petroleum product and will not contaminate powder or primers. So I'm not going to be tumbling these. Let's see if this contaminates our powder. Once we resize, we'll wipe off the outside, but all that lube that went down into the necks is still going to be there. So we'll keep an eye on that. So we're going to be using my Forster full-length sizing die. And the instructions on this lube tell you to wipe out your die and then shoot a little bit of it up inside of there. So that's what I did. Got this guy all wiped down and the other lube's off of it. So I'm going to give it a little spritz and we'll hit the expander ball while we're at it. And now I guess those guys need to dry. All right, to set up our full-length sizing die, we're going to use the Hornady case comparator, and we'll bump our shoulder about 3 thousandths. That's what we'll shoot for. So let's get a before measurement. This first one here is 1.218. Next one's reading 1.2175. The next piece is 1.2175. Let's shoot for 1.215 or maybe 1.214, but we'll start with a goal of 1.215. I found that in my gun, bumping the shoulder a couple thousandths with this die is plenty enough. It sizes the body of the case plenty enough so that the gun's going to function just fine. And with just a couple thousandths of bump, we're not overworking our brass. So I want to screw this guy down until it very lightly touches the shell holder. I think that's about where it needs to be. And let's size the first one and see what happens here. First things first, our case didn't get stuck, so our lube at least worked a little bit. So it doesn't look like we bumped it, or if we did, just barely, 1.217. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to another case. I don't want to continuously resize one case over and over and over again and work that neck too much. So during the setup here, I want to switch between a couple different cases. Okay, I moved it down just a little bit. Let's see what this one gives us. Definitely seemed to get worked a little bit harder. Hopefully we didn't go too far here. And I'm getting 1.2155, so we're almost there. Like half a thousandth is really all we need. So let's see what this gives us. I might have gone just a touch too far, but that's okay. Like I said, if we hit 1.214, that's completely fine. And it looks like that's just what we've done. So I'm getting 1.214 or 1.2145 sometimes if we wiggle it just right. So good. I think our sizing die is set up here. Let's do a couple of them and make sure we get consistent numbers here. And the two pieces that we already sized once, let's run those guys back through again. And let's double check. Yeah, these are coming out very consistent. They're all 1.214 or 1.2145 I see sometimes. So I think this is a really good setting for our full-length sizing die. And at least here with our first 6 cases, like this sizing seems to be going really smooth. I haven't felt like I was about to stick a case at all. So I guess the Hornady one-shot lube, at least in this case, is doing a good job. Tell you what we should check is our case length and see if we're going to need to trim. Let's see, our max case length is 1.520. I think these were pretty short to begin with. There's 1.509, 1.510, 1.510, 1.510, 1.510. So these are all extremely consistent and they're still 10 thousandths short of our trim length. Yeah, that one was 1.509, a little bit shorter than the others. So very consistent. Let's see how much we're actually stretching. Like here's the next case before is 1.510. So let's size it real quick, see if it stretches at all. This is the beauty of, you know, bumping your shoulder as little as possible, is a lot of times you just don't get a whole lot of stretch. Yep, 1.5125. So we stretched about 2.5 thousandths. That's pretty reasonable. Let's check the next one just for the heck of it. Ooh, this one's a little bit longer. 1.515 before. And run it up in. See what we get. 1.518. So that guy's pretty close to needing trimmed. I guess once I get done, I should probably run through and check them all and make sure I don't have any oddballs that came out long. So I'll get this finished up and then we'll be ready for primers. All right, so after measuring the length of all of them, I did find a couple pieces that are longer. There were actually 3 of them. Like this one's 1.519. Remember, 1.520 is our maximum case length. So what I've done is pull out my RCBS Trim Pro, and I'm just shaving off a couple thousandths, like just a few thousandths of these 3 pieces that were a little bit long. Nothing crazy. So shaving it off, a little bit of a deburr and a chamfer, and taking them down to 1.514. The vast majority of the pieces are right about 1.510. So these 3 pieces that I'm trimming, they're still going to be some of the longer pieces in the batch, but it just backs them off a little bit from that maximum case length. The other thing I've decided to do is to go ahead and anneal these pieces of brass. As I mentioned, this will be the 3rd firing on this Lapua brass. And this brass isn't cheap. I want to take care of it. I want it to last. Yep, this guy's also 1.514. So good. So like I mentioned, I've got my salt bath annealing set up, warming up here. If you didn't see my video on salt bath annealing, I did one just a couple weeks ago. And this Lapua brass, I want it to last, and annealing it every firing or every second firing should help keep it in good shape. So this guy's still warming up. We're up to 880 degrees. We're almost to the 930 degree target. Move this guy a little bit closer. Now, unfortunately, this means that I won't be able to finish loading these tonight. I'll have to finish up in the morning, because once I get this salt on the brass, I really need to tumble them again. I need to run them through the wet tumbling process again. So that means we'll be finishing up in the morning. All right, so I got my salt bath up to temperature. I've got a metronome running here. I'm going to give these guys a 6-second dunk into the salt. And then they go down into a bowl of water. Once I get my rhythm here, I'll switch to doing 2 at a time. Really need to put on my gloves. One thing I definitely learned during that video we did on the salt bath annealing is that gloves are important. All right, folks, that's about it here. Just going to run through the rest of these, give them a little dunk, and then put them in the wet tumbler to get the salt and the lube off of them. And we'll be ready for primers in the morning. Okay, where were we? It's the next day. Our brass has been resized. We trimmed a couple pieces a little bit, we annealed them, and then we tumbled and dried them. So what we've got left here, first of all, case mouth. Just going to hit them lightly with the deburring and chamfering tool. Then we need to install the primers and weigh out the powder charges. And the last step is to seat our bullets. This will be exactly the same as it was in the previous 2 videos we've shot with this bullet. I'm using my Forster Ultra Micrometer seating die. So let's get this guy set up and we'll dial in our number. Let's see, what was our target cartridge-based ogive number? It was 1.728 inches. So that ought to be pretty easy to get dialed in. See where we're starting from. 1.753. Let's go down 20 and we'll reseat this guy and seat the next one. Make sure we're getting consistent numbers. 1.736 and 1.7355. So let's go down 8, 6, 7, 8. And that should be just about perfect. Let's run a couple through and we should be good. Did I screw up my math? Because I went a little bit too far. I'm at 1.725. So it's just a couple thousandths. I think we'll go ahead and leave it. Yeah, like overall length about 2.257. Yep, the next one's also about 2.257. So I went about 3 thousandths too short. Screw it. Let's just stick with this number. Can't believe I did that. Now, we've still got a bit of case capacity left over. Let's go ahead and seat one of the max charges with PowerPro Varmint just to check and see. I think we'll probably still feel some powder moving, and I do, so our overall length shouldn't have changed. Yep, it's the same, 1.725. And our max charge of 8208 XBR, let's go ahead and seat one of those. Yep, I didn't hear any powder crunching. I still feel a little bit moving. And that guy's, it's 1.726, whatever, pretty close. Good enough. So that's our bullet seating die set up, and I just need to go through and seat them all. So that's it. Let's go ahead and get out on the range. Okay folks, it's time to get started. My gun here has got an 18-inch Faxon barrel. It's their heavy fluted match series barrel. I've got a Silencer Co. Omega suppressor on there. This is a 6 to 24 power Vortex Diamondback Tactical. We're going to be shooting it on 24 power. The target is at 100 yards. The dots are 1 inch. I've got my lab radar chronograph set up and ready to rock. So we're ready to get started. We're going to start out. This is the same load that we shot in the last video. This was our last load, 29.0 grains. Now in the last video, this shot like a 1/2 inch group and had an 8.5 feet per second standard deviation. So let's hope we get similar performance this time. I have warmed up the gun. I shot 5 rounds through it just a few minutes ago to get things warmed up and ready to go. So we're ready to go. Let's see what happens. So we picked up some velocity from the last video. Average velocity that time was 24.26. In the last video, it was 23.72. Now today's a pretty good day. You can see I'm wearing short sleeves. I think it's about 60 degrees. I'd have to go back and double check the weather on my last range trip, but I'm pretty sure it was a good bit colder. And that's what you get with ball powders like PowerPro Varmint, right? Weather's going to affect your load. That's just all there is to it. So we've always got to keep that in mind. We don't want to work up a load at 30 degrees and then shoot it in the summer at 100 degrees. You can get yourself into big trouble. But the good news, so we still got a 7.2 feet per second standard deviation. In the last video, we had an 8.5. So those excellent numbers carried forward to today. So let's move forward. Next up is 29.2 grains. Let's see how it does. So our brass continues to look good. The group looks good. The velocity, we made it to 2,450. That was kind of the general goal, was to maybe get this up to 2,450 feet per second, and we're already there. So it's got me a little bit worried. I'm afraid we're going to hit pressure signs here on the top end. That's fine. We'll see how far we can get. Another single digit standard deviation of 8.8. I'll tell you what, When it comes to ball powders like Power Pro Varmint, to get really good standard deviation numbers like this, you've just got to hit on a magical combo of brass, powder, bullet, primer, and gun. And I think that's what we've got here. Like, this is extremely consistent velocities, and that's not easy to come by when it comes to ball powders. All right, we're moving on. 29.4 grains is next. All right, so far so good with the brass. Still looking good, no pressure signs. Another good group and an outstanding standard deviation, 6.2 feet per second. Sometimes it's frustrating, like you'll go to the range and you'll shoot a set of groups and your standard deviation numbers will be fantastic, and then you load up that same exact load and go back to the range and they're crappy. And I think a lot of times that has to do with the small sample size, right? 5 shots, determining a standard deviation with 5 shots is not exactly the perfect way to do things. But I'm not saying it's useless. I'm just saying that, you know, sometimes it lies to you. So days like today where we come back and the standard deviation numbers are just as good as they were in the last video, it's a pretty good feeling. So let's move on. 29.6 grains. Tell you what, folks, I think we got a good combo here. That's an awesome group. Velocity up to 2481, standard deviation of 6.4. This is just good stuff all around. The brass is still looking good. I've had a few pieces of brass where, you know, I could certainly see where the ejector was, but nothing dramatic, nothing I'm worried about. So let's go ahead and shoot the last one, 29.8 grains. Let's see if we can hit 2500. Okay, so in that string, we had one velocity that read 6,196 feet per second. I think the chronograph made a little bit of an error, especially with the lab radar. You can see, like, as it goes down range, what the velocity is. So at 25 yards, it was 2,458 feet per second. So you'd think if you were starting out at 6,200 feet per second, it wouldn't drop to 2,458 at 25 yards. So let's delete that shot and see what that does to our average. All right, 2,507 feet per second. We got 5 pretty decent groups. We've got a very consistent point of impact all the way across all 5 groups. So the standard deviation here on this last group is 9.3. I can't remember the last time I shot 5 consecutive single-digit standard deviations with a ball powder. So this is just all good. And did I mention that the brass still looks fine? 29.8 grains, the brass still looked okay. So it is all good. I'm thinking maybe 29.5 grains, something like that might be a good load. I don't know. We'll think it over here once we get back to the bench. But for now, it's time to switch over to 8208 XBR. But before I do that, I'm going to give the gun a minute to cool down. I've been taking my time. You know, the gun's not too hot, but still, you know, need to rest the eyes, let the gun cool down a little bit. Okay, so break time is over. The gun has cooled down a little bit. It's time to move on to IMR 8208 XBR. We're starting out with 26.3 grains. Let's see what happens. Okay, so our velocity is nice and low to start out with, exactly 2,300 feet per second. Our brass looks fine. Amazing standard deviation of 3.7, extreme spread of 10 feet per second, and an awesome group. I don't know what more we could ask for here. Let's move on. 26.6 grains is next. All right, that's a good group. The brass looks great. Velocity 2,319 feet per second. A little bit lower than I was hoping for, but we should make it up to 2,400, I would think. By the time we get to our max charge, maybe, I don't know, we'll see. Our first double-digit standard deviation number, 10.6. Extreme spread was 29 feet per second. The group was freaking awesome, best of the day so far. So let's move on. 26.9 grains is next. All right, another good group. Brass looks great. Velocity up to 2,352 feet per second. We're back down to single digit standard deviation numbers, 7.8. The extreme spread was 18. The group was freaking awesome. We got a nice little string of groups going on down there, don't we? Let's keep it going. Next up is 27.2 grains. All right, so I gotta admit, this is a pretty impressive string of groups we got going on here. The brass still looks fantastic. Velocity's up to 2378. Another single digit standard deviation number, which we always like to see. That's a 6.0. So one more group to go. Hopefully I don't screw it up. Let's see what happens. All right, so that's our worst group of the string there, but it's still probably a 0.7 or a 0.8. Velocity, we hit 2,400 feet per second, 2,404. Another single digit standard deviation number of 7.4. What a great target down there. Like really, really good stuff. So let's get back to the bench, talk it all out. Okay, let's start with a look at the brass, and there is some stuff to see here, just a little bit. Nothing dramatic, but this is the max charge of Power Pro Varmint, and kind of like I mentioned on the range, you can definitely see where the ejector was. All right, I'll get them rotated so it's on the top of both pieces there. Yeah, hopefully you can see what I'm talking about. But nothing dramatic, there aren't any burrs or anything, just a little bit of a smear. No excessive flattening of the primers or any sort of rim damage. So I think it's looking pretty good. Yeah, everything's fine. And I actually did see a little bit of that on the top end with 8208 XBR as well. Actually, this one on the right is fine, but the one on the left there, right at the top, just tiniest little bit of a smear, but nothing to really freak out about. Like I mentioned earlier, my experience with 8208 XBR, I've gotten myself into trouble a couple times going a little bit too hot, and it kind of sneaks up on you. So I don't know if I'd want to go any higher here with 8208 XBR or not. Probably not much. What was our velocity? So we made it to 2,400 feet per second, so there's not a whole lot left. But overall, pretty decent day on the brass front. We didn't tear up any of our nice Lapua brass. So, all right, let's move on. Okay, next let's have another look at the groups. And this was a really great target. The top row with Power Pro Varmint, what I like about this target, well, first of all, excellent standard deviations across the board and very little shift in point of impact. Like everything was right about 1 o'clock there, just outside the orange. So what that tells me is with a ball powder that maybe is going to be temperature sensitive on us, that if my velocity swings a little bit, it's probably not really going to affect my zero, and it's probably not going to affect my group size much, right? Because between the last video and this video, like these have really, it shot nothing but good groups. So whether we get variations from temperature, or maybe we're throwing charges with our powder measure and we get a load that's 0.2 of a grain light or heavy, it's probably going to shoot right there with the rest of them. So I really like this combination of Power Pro Varmint and the 120 ELD. Now our last group, that was our only group today that was over an inch. It was 1.147 inches, but we made it to 2,500 feet per second. That's not bad for our little 18-inch barrel. But I think for my load here, you know, a safe bet would be 29 grains. See, the last video, it was around 2,375 feet per second. Today's video, it was around 2,425 feet per second. So we could basically call it a 2,400 feet per second load. The groups are good. We know we've got plenty of safety buffer on the top end. So that's one option. Or maybe you like 29.4 grains here or something like that. I don't know. There's nothing to avoid, I guess, is the good part. Like that's the really perfect powder and bullet combination, is when point of impact is perfectly flat. The groups are good all the way across the board. There's really nothing, there's no bad node or whatever to avoid. It's just all good. And that's where we're at with Power Pro Varmint. Now our second row, 8208 XBR, just incredible groups. That second one, 0.317 inches. Our best of the day. Our best group of the day had the worst standard deviation of the day. It's always weird how like that seems to happen more than you would think. But a 10.6 feet per second standard deviation still is not terrible. So it's nothing I'm freaked out about. And man, I love 8208 XBR. It always seems to shoot well. 223, it's a great powder. Here in the Grendel, it's a great powder. It's just a really useful and very flexible powder. And I couldn't be happier with the results we saw with it today. Some of the best groups this gun's ever shot. Probably the best groups this gun has ever shot. And the good thing, I mean, you know, I'm kind of talking up Varmint here because it's a ball powder, and you know, if I'm loading bulk ammo or whatever, I can just load up with my powder measure and it's going to throw really consistent. You know, 8208 XBR is not bad. It's an extruded powder, but it has very small granules. So it's a little bit aggravating to use in a powder measure, but it's not terrible. And we've got no shortage of good loads to pick from here from this target, right? Like all the way from 26.6 to 27.2, those three groups stacked together that were all 0.3s and 0.4s, that's just good stuff. But with 8208 XBR, we kind of did have some wandering point of impact, at least in these velocity, you know, in this velocity range we tested. That point of impact seemed to be climbing and the groups were moving to the left just slightly. So not a huge deal, it's just something that, you know, is a little bit different than what we saw with Varmint. All right, I think that's enough yapping about the target. So I get asked quite a lot to do videos on the different load development methodologies and ways to work up a load. And what it always comes back to for me is I don't think there's any replacement for just trying different bullets. Like, I don't know how many bullets we've tried in this Faxon barrel, but it's been quite a few. But from our very first video with this 120 grain ELD match, we immediately knew, like, yep, here it is. And with the, 4 or 5 powders we've shot with it, they've all shot well. So that's where I always get hung up whenever people try to distill down the load development process to something simple and quick. Is, listen, I mean, if you're starting with a bad bullet, you're never going to get there. You're just going to waste your time. And the other thing I think is some of the magical load development methodologies are written for a different audience than me. Like, I'm not shooting custom rifles and stuff like that. It's like if, let's say you're a competitor, I don't know, and there's 20 guys you always compete with at the club, and half of you use the same gunsmith, and all of you shoot, let's say 6.5 Creedmoor, and you go to the gunsmith and you have them make you a barrel. You're shooting the same reamer as half the guys at the club, and you know that they all shoot the 140 grain Burger hybrid target, and they all shoot H4350 powder, and the gunsmith hands you the gun and says, yep, this is chambered perfectly for the 140 grain Burger hybrid target. Well, of course load development is going to be easy. You know what everybody else is shooting. You know what the gun's kind of built around. So any magical one-shot load development method is going to get you there, right? That's a whole different thing than trying to find what's going to shoot in an off-the-shelf hunting rifle or a, I don't know, medium-priced AR barrel like our Faxon. Like, the Faxon barrels aren't cheap, but this isn't exactly an ultra-premium barrel. It's just a completely different situation, and I don't think there's any replacement for trying different bullets. I know that's expensive, and not everybody can do that, but that's the best way I know to work up a killer load in guns like this. So I guess back to my original point, yeah, I don't think you're probably going to see those videos on my channel because none of them cover what I consider to be the most important thing, and that's finding the right bullet. And the good news is, man, we found the right bullet for my Grendel. It's not the bullet I wanted to shoot, right? Like the 123 grain has a better ballistic coefficient. There are a lot of sexier bullets on the market, but I'd rather shoot sexy groups with a bullet I wasn't expecting to be my favorite than shoot crappy groups with the bullet that everybody says is the best. So I think that's where we'll leave it, folks. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time.